Hey everyone, it's Colin. Marvel's been experimenting more and more with the multiverse, and it's got me thinking about potential crossovers. It'd be really cool if they started making big crossover media outside of the comics. It just seems as if there isn't any franchises that have been crossing over with them.
Marvel vs. Capcom!
Marvel vs. Capcom, the retro fighting game franchise that seems to have been left in the past until recently. The Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection is coming to all platforms, and this marks a huge event for the franchise. So I figured, why not go back and take a look at the games in this collection to see if they're worth your money today. Now I'll just be straight up with you, I love these games to death. I grew up playing them at a nearby arcade and I just never could get enough of them. But I'll quit flapping my gums and we'll just jump right into the game that started it all. X-Men Children of the Atom was the first fighting game Capcom made with the Marvel license. This featured, as mentioned in the title, the incredibly popular X-Men. This game was a round-based fighting game similar to Street Fighter 2, but with the characters absolutely amped up. They did this to really show off the power of these mutants. This game's roster consists of 11 fighters, 6 being X-Men heroes and 4 being villains. And yes, I know that only adds up to 10, but we also have a secret character. That's right, Street Fighter 2's Akuma makes its own appearance, making this the first time Capcom has crossed over with Marvel. For the X-Men side of things, we have Wolverine, Cyclops, Iceman, Colossus, Storm, and Psylocke. And for the villains, we have Spiral, Omega Red, Silver Samurai, and Sentinel. There are also 2 bosses in this game, being Juggernaut and Magneto. This game was the catalyst for Marvel vs. Capcom and was greatly received by the fans. I mean, how could you dislike this? With the excellent sprite work and the flashy looks. Now this game is probably the slowest out of all of them in my opinion, but by all means, it's not slow for fighting games. But the franchise does really pick up in speed as you go further in. X-Men Children of the Atom was so popular that Marvel had to actually double down and make another game with Capcom, this time featuring the Marvel superheroes. Marvel superheroes had a new roster. We had some returning X-Men, such as Wolverine and Psylocke, and now playable Juggernaut and Magneto as well. The brand new characters consist of Shuma Gorath, Blackheart, Hulk, Iron Man, Captain America, and my personal favorite, Spider-Man. 2 bosses were featured in this game as well, the first one being Dr. Doom and the second being Thanos. This game adds another core mechanic that X-Men Coda didn't, being the Infinity Stones. It also seems to have a big focus on more air combos, making this game a lot crazier than its predecessor. I personally like this one a lot more than the previous entry. It's the first game where you actually really see that Marvel vs. Capcom DNA bleed into. And like I mentioned, I really like the focus on aerial combat in this game. It just made it a staple for the franchise to go forward with. But if Capcom wanted to keep pumping these games out with Marvel, they're gonna have to think a lot bigger. And that's where we get our next game of the franchise. X-Men vs. Street Fighter was that idea brought to you in X-Men Coda, but just thrown at you at full speed. This time, instead of being a round-based fighter, they added a tag team mechanic, which would then become a staple for the franchise. This made the game way more fast-paced, a lot more flashy, and a lot more crazy. We get a huge roster of X-Men heroes and villains, as well as a huge Street Fighter cast. A lot of the X-Men heroes were returning from X-Men Children of the Atom, but all of the Street Fighter sprites were actually ripped from the Alpha series. And I will say, thank God they did this, because Akuma looked really out of place in X-Men Children of the Atom, but here, they look just at home. This game was the first crossover of this tag team franchise, and was pretty broken originally. There were 3 versions of this arcade classic released, with each previous iteration patching things from the first, fixing things like corner infinites, some specials, that sort of stuff. I'm not too sure which port of this is actually coming to the collection, but hopefully it's the first one, because that's the one that people typically play and love, because you know, you gotta break the game with those infinites. Well, where did you think the series was gonna go from here, you may ask? They're gonna introduce the Marvel superheroes. Marvel superheroes vs. Street Fighter is probably the laziest fighter of them all. There's no new sprites, no new stages, and kind of a weird roster on the Marvel side of things. They used the same boss from X-Men vs. Street Fighter, but added a new one after him, being Cyber Akuma, who is now really iconic, but originally was just a sprite rework of the character. All the secret characters are just palette swaps of current characters in the game, with Armored Spider-Man just being a silver version of Spider-Man, and US Agent just being a reshade of Captain America. Like I mentioned, it also had some weird choices for the roster, like adding Omega Red instead of someone more iconic like Magneto. Also Shumagorath, like just add Iron Man back. This game did introduce the assist mechanic for the first time though, allowing you to tag in your second fighter that was in rest for a quick special move before he hops out of the action. This game also has the best announcer by far.
It's Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter! Survive a tiny adventure! Don't miss out on the enjoyment of a lifetime! Behold, amazing fantasy! Don't miss the most amazing tag team fighting game ever! Are you ready for a new challenger? History experience Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter!
But after all, it did come out 7 or 8 months after X-Men vs. Street Fighter did, and when how fast the next entry in the series came out, it was clear where they focused their resources. The first Marvel vs. Capcom, my personal favorite, came out just 6 months after the last entry in the franchise, but this time actually sporting a lot of changes. Brand new stages, brand new fighters, and a huge new duo attack, letting up to 4 characters being playable on the screen at the same time. It's also the only game in the franchise to have assist-specific characters, and they added a ton of these. All of them are pretty much useless once you get to Colossus, and there are some notable assist characters that aren't playable in any of these 2D games of the franchise. The first one, I think the biggest one, would probably be Thor. This is the only appearance Thor has in the Marvel vs. Capcom 2D fighters, and it's as an assist character. He actually won't be playable at all until the third entry in this franchise. But a lot of this has to do with characters such as Thor and Iron Man not being super popular until actually the MCU came around. The second is Jubilee. Now a lot of you might not know who that is. She was in the X-Men animated series cartoon at the time when these games were coming out, and that show was super popular. She's also featured in X-Men 97. This game also has the best artwork, in my opinion, for any game in the franchise, dare I say, any 2D Capcom fighter. The music is so fitting, and the game's just gorgeous and beautiful. And you may ask, how could they possibly top this release? Well, in a good old Marvel fashion, gotta go bigger, and you gotta go even more flashy. Yes, next we have the most sought after of the entire series. The most popular and monumental game of the franchise. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, New Age of Heroes. Featuring 54 different fighters, all new 3D backgrounds, a smooth jazz soundtrack. Oh, and don't forget that iconic character select music.
I wanna take you for a ride. I wanna take you for a ride.
This game introduced 2 major things. One being the brand new 3-player tag team mechanic, where your assist characters are now your teammates again, but this time with 3 different assist types for each character. The second being the removal of 2 buttons and the addition to replace them. Both heavy punch and heavy kicks were removed, and place took the assist buttons. Depending on which one you press, it'll call in your assist character at just the press of a button. In order to do this, they had to smash the light, medium, and heavy attacks all into 4 buttons. These cycle through the move types, or selectable based on which direction your joystick is going. As I mentioned though, this roster is huge. This game being the first Capcom fighter on the Naomi boards, it really showed its scale. All the previous entries in the series were made on the CP2 board, but this Naomi board had the same internals as the Dreamcast, which also made the Dreamcast port of this game run just as beautiful as the arcade version. But after the Dreamcast failure, they would have to port the game a couple years later to PS2 and Xbox. The PS2 version is pretty forgettable, missing a lot of animations and just not the greatest version of the game, but the Xbox still remains quite a bit intact, and it's also the version I own. Although I don't really ever play it, because I'm either playing on Fightcade against people, or I'm using my arcade 1-up. Like I said, I really like this franchise. And with this new collection coming out, we're getting a revival of this stellar series. And I do want to talk a little bit more about it and what we need to do for this collection as fans. This is the first time Marvel and Capcom have came together since 2017 after Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. That game flopped, and there's a number of reasons for it, but I'm not going to get into it now. This franchise has been completely dead. You should not be able to buy any of the games digitally, new or anything at all, unless you got it through a third-party seller off of eBay and for like the PS2, Xbox, or Dreamcast, With these prices being around 150 bucks on average for a copy of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 alone. There was an HD remake for Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on the PS3 and Xbox 360 that was a digital only release and is no longer able to buy and has been delisted since 2013, I believe. But the point is, if you're interested in even seeing a potential in a Marvel vs. Capcom 4, it's important we buy this collection. We have to show a huge interest in this franchise. And companies will take notice if this game has phenomenal sales. They will know people want more. And if that happens, next thing you know, we're in that 1%, as Maximilian Dude says, where we could get a Marvel vs. Capcom 4. So please, if you're interested in the Marvel brand or fighting games at all, buy this one and give it a shot. And especially so if you're already playing this game on Fightcade or emulators alike, because we as a community need to make sure this game gets brought back at full force. And the last thing I really wanted to touch on was my personal story with these games. Now, I probably discovered it in a similar way, just like all of you guys. I grew up playing these games, especially Marvel vs. Capcom 1. And I know what some of you guys are thinking. Colin, you're 19. These games are almost a decade older than you. How did you grow up with them? Well, ever since I was little, me and my family would go on camping trips, and one place we went every year had an arcade near it. This arcade was massive. Tons of cabinets everywhere, but among one of them, I saw this game that featured some of my favorite Marvel heroes and some familiar faces on that Capcom side. That game was Marvel vs. Capcom 1, Clash of the Superheroes. I was really little at the time, probably around 5 or 6. I was looking up at those marquees, seeing Spider-Man, Captain America, Wolverine, and even Mega Man, which I knew from some of my Wii games. Watching that demo playthrough, I just really loved how flashy it looked, and it mesmerized me. I mean, the second I recognized Spider-Man was there, I was sold. I had to get a stool to prop myself up, so I was high enough to reach that control deck. I put my 50 cents in that machine, and I pressed that player 1 button and got greeted to that character select screen, where I immediately chose Spider-Man. And I did it without even batting an eye, like he's my guy, of course I did that. But my second option, that's where there was more to choose. I saw Wolverine, I saw War Machine, I saw Hulk, but who stuck out to me the most? Venom, my favorite villain of all time. After picking the Spider team, I went into my first battle, selected easy mode, and put it on turbo. And like I said, with all these colors, I was just absolutely mesmerized. This game was like eye candy. And that one experience was enough to keep me going back to that machine every year I went back to that arcade. Flash forward to when I was 16, I got my first job, and all of a sudden, for the first time in 4 years, we're going back to that spot where that arcade is to stay. We get to that arcade one more time, and sure enough, first game I'm looking for is Marvel vs. Capcom. This cabinet definitely wasn't in too hot a shape. There was definitely some graphical issues with it, but it still worked, and most of the punch and kick buttons also functioned. After the day at the arcade, we go back to the place we're staying, and I think to myself, it's a long shot, but I wonder if those people who made those arcade machines I saw in Walmart and Target had made one for Marvel vs. Capcom yet. Sure enough, I look it up. First thing that I see pop up is the Marvel vs. Capcom arcade 1-up cabinet that was made 6 months prior to me searching for it. Best Buy still had stock, one of the very few that did, for $499.99 with the riser and the stool. Took a couple of my first paychecks from that job and I ordered that thing immediately. And that's where I got introduced to most of the rest of the games like Marvel Superheroes, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, and Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. Now I played these games once or twice at other arcades, but I didn't really remember them. But with this arcade 1-up cabinet, I fell in love with these fighting games, and especially the fight stick. And I played this cabinet to death. The first one here directly to my right is that cabinet right now. The volume rocker doesn't work on it, and the left speaker is blown out. But it still works. A year later they announced the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 arcade 1-up cabinet. And it was when I was watching EVO, and I just remember thinking, damn, they actually did it. Because at that point, I had researched the franchise and I knew that this game was an illegal nightmare. I was well aware of Maximilian Dude's free MVC2 campaign. Here I am thinking, do I really need it? Keep in mind, I had little to no experience playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2 at the time. Like I'd probably played it once before, and to drop $5.99 on a cabinet for a game you haven't really even played yet is a big chunk of change. I played Marvel 2 a little bit more on Fightcade and decided I need to get the cabinet. I pre-ordered Marvel vs. Capcom 2 from Best Buy the day it dropped, not even a minute after it was listed. Luckily got one of the first units sold before it was sold out. My buddy and I finished work one day, headed back to my house once we knew it was delivered, and we built that sucker. And it was a blast. We loaded it up, and sure enough, the first game I played was Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Couldn't wait to sink so much time in this game. And at the time, I had just broken up with my girlfriend. It was rough for me, I won't lie. It was my first serious relationship, and being able to sink so much time into a game and get lost in it really helped, and that game was Marvel vs. Capcom 2. That was almost 2 years ago now, and I still think these cabinets are worth every penny I paid for them. And also, let's be clear about these guys. The online for MVC1 is spectacular. It's amazing. They did a great job. MVC2, on the other hand, blows. And it was a huge letdown to everyone in the community. I don't know, it has a special place in my heart, and I still love it. And I probably won't play online on that cabinet ever again once this collection comes out, besides maybe for MVC1, but these guys are definitely some of my favorite parts of my collection, and the reason I'm into fighting games at all. I even did a little customization on my own, put in my own buttons and sticks. It was a fun time. Now these games are very strange and weird concepts to happen at all in general, but they made some of the best damn fighting games ever. My favorite fighting games. If Marvel and Capcom decide to bury this franchise after this re-release, I would be a little sad, of course, but not that surprised. It would take a lot to get a new entry in this franchise, but it is something I would definitely want to see. I personally will be picking up this collection on all platforms it releases, especially those physical versions, since those ones can't be stripped away from us. And I'll probably make damn sure I make a video on the collection when it comes out. I'll probably also be doing some streaming for it, which I don't ever really use my Twitch anymore, but you can find me there at twitch.tv/ITZContrast. Keep in mind, I am a casual for these fighting games. I'm no pro by any means. All I can really say from here is that Marvel vs. Capcom is gonna take us for a ride at least one more time. And it was the voices of the people that brought it around again. So just buy the collection, and let's see what happens. Thank you for watching. It's been Colin.